Throughout history, entire human civilizations have disappeared without warning. Cities once full of life suddenly fell silent, leaving behind only ruins and unanswered questions. What really happened to these lost societies?
Human history is not only written with the rise of the king's victories and empires, but also full of the secrets of those buried in silence without leaving a single explanation behind. The land we build cities on today, once lived by great crowds, but rises on the remains of settlements left empty from the morning. Neither a war mark, nor an epidemic disease, nor a corpse. Only the unspoken remains that said we were here. We examined the 10 mysterious communities that disappeared without leaving a trace in the dark holes of history. If you are ready, we are starting. Welcome to Selman's Shelf. In 1587, a group of about 115 people in the leadership of John White, with the support of Queen Elizabeth, settled on the island of Roanoke, North America, with the support of Queen Elizabeth. This group did not consist of only soldiers, there were also women and children among them. Even John White's grandson Virginia Deer was born in the American continent as the first English baby. However, the fate of the colony changed completely with John White's return to England in order to bring the materials they needed. It took exactly 3 years for the Englishman to return to the island due to the Spanish War, which exploded when he arrived in England. When he finally arrived in Roanoke in 1590, he was greeted with a frightening view. Once upon a time, there was not even one person in the location where the houses rose. 115 people seemed to have disappeared as if the ground had cracked and entered it. There was neither a body nor a collision or attack mark around. Houses had been demolished, which made the colonists think that they were leaving there in a planned way instead of running in a hurry. The only thread left from the team was the Croatian word, which was carved with the name of a tribe living on an island and in that region. John White thought that the colonists could have moved to this island, but he made it impossible to search for bad weather conditions and storms, and eventually had to return to England empty-handed. Tens of theories were produced over Roanoke over the centuries. Some argued that the colonists were murdered by the locals, and some argued that they died of hunger. However, the strongest theory is that the white settlers were part of the Croatoan locals to survive and were temporarily assimilated with them. In the 1700s, travelers who went to the region reported that some locals were gray-eyed and that their ancestors could read from books. Despite this, it protects the mystery of the evaporation of 115 people without leaving a trace and is still not made an official statement today. The lost colony Roanoke continues to be the most active and famous case in American history. One of the most mysterious disappearance stories in history, today in Pakistan and the northwestern Indian borders, the remaining lands were also experienced. Uyali, the Indus Valley, which rose around 3300 BC, had a technology far beyond its own period. It is estimated that the population of this civilization, which lives in huge cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, is more than 5 million. A huge number that cannot even be imagined for that period. However, such an advanced and crowded people left their cities without leaving any trace behind and left the historical scene. The most striking point of this disappearance is the condition of the cities. Archaeological excavations show that Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa have not been destroyed by a war or invasion. People killed in the streets with sword strikes, burnt buildings or a mine. On the contrary, people left their things as if they were going to come back one day and entered the city in a big order. The architecture of the cities was so advanced that they had the world's first sewage systems, plain streets, and standard Tula dimensions. The fact that such a regular society left the city without hurrying brings to mind what scares them. The biggest secret of civilization lies in the languages that have not yet been solved. The Indian people left thousands of shortcomings on their mules and tablets. However, they could not learn what they believed, who they were managed by or why they went. Just like a silent farewell, they left behind only huge stone structures and mysterious symbols. Scientists are today on the brink of a change in riverbeds, severe drought or agricultural collapse. However, the question of where and how 5 million people went and how they dispersed in such a flawless way continues to be one of the biggest gaps in modern archaeology. In the southeastern part of North America, in Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, one of the most talented architects of history lived in the barren lands, the indigenous Pueblo people, known as the Anasazis or the Modern. The biggest features that distinguish them from other societies are the large stone cities that seem impossible to reach in the vertical slopes of huge canyons. Today, these stone palaces, which we see in areas such as Mesava, consist of hundreds of rooms and contain thousands of people. However, around 1300 AD, these shadowy cities were completely emptied in just a few decades. The departure of the Anasazis left a big question mark behind them. Because in the remaining cities, there was no sign of a great rebellion, nor was there an emergency that led to mass deaths. The cities were not burned down. On the contrary, people seem to have gone for a walk after noon and never returned again. Archaeologists found touchstands in the halls of the houses full of corn and unfinished crafts. This situation shows that the separation plan is a decision that does not return. Why did they go? One of the most popular theories is the great drought that has been raging in the region for 20 years. However, the Anasazis had also experienced droughts before and managed to cope with them. Some researchers say that the social change of belief or a religious prophecy makes them think that they are forced to migrate to the south, to the regions where Hopi and Zuni peoples live today. Ruti settlement order and how they carried it to the edge of those huge stone blocks and how they carried it to the edge of those huge stone blocks and how they left such a Ruti settlement order and how they left such a. When it comes to North America, migratory tribes and tents come to mind, but in the heart of the American kernel, today's St. Louis was once a huge metropolis near St. Louis. Cahokia, this city, which lived in the Golden Age around 1050 AD, was one of the largest settlements in the world at that time. Thus, it is estimated that its population is between 20,000 and 40,000. This figure was at a level to compete with the population of cities such as London or Rome at that time. However, this enormous power was quietly erased from the historical scene as if it had never existed in the 1300s. The most prominent feature of Cahokia was the huge soil pyramids built with human hands. The structure, known today as the Monk's Mound, Keshish Hoi, which rises in the center of the city, had a wider base than the large pyramid in Egypt at an altitude of about 30 meters. This city was a solar kingdom with a complex social hierarchy, but everything changed in the 1300s. This huge city was emptied without leaving a trace of a war, an invasion, or a great fire. The most interesting thing is that even the next local people in the region do not know who or why they left this city. There is almost no detail about a civilization of this size in the rumors. The people of Cahokia, without leaving any written document after, seem to have taken a sign and disappeared. Although scientists, flood pressures, environmental factors such as deforestation or the collapse of corn farming remain, the question of why such an organized people has not established a new Cahokia in another place remains unanswered. Once upon a time, the huge soil hills where thousands of people's voices echoed today, they only make a house with the shelter of the wind. In the depths of the warm Sahara Desert in the south of Egypt, a mysterious secret lies under the sands. Nabda Playa. This community is made special by the famous Stonehenge in England, who had broken the tongue of the sky 2,000 years ago. In the 7000 years BC, this region, which is one of the driest places in the world today, was a valley with seasonal lakes and green waters. The people living here were not just simple nomads who dealt with animalism, they were the first real astronomers of history. The people of Norta Pylea built the oldest astronomical structure known to the world by the ancient Norta Pylea. These stone structures indicated the movements of the sun and the stars in a flawless way. They knew when the rain would rain and when the rain would reach the water from the sky. However, this culture, which has such an advanced observation ability and social organization, suddenly disappeared around 5000 BC. As the main reason for their departure, climate change is shown. The Sahara has begun to dry up quickly and become the desert of today. However, the mystery begins right here. Thousands of people with the power and knowledge to build such a large stone monument have left no trace of where they went. Neither the escape routes are certain, nor is it a new region they settled in. Some archaeologists argue that the ancient Egyptian civilization was founded by migrating to the north of the people of Nabta Pylea, the Nile Valley. If this theory is correct, the roots of that tremendous knowledge collection that built the pyramids may be based on mysterious astronomers who disappeared in this desert at one point. One of the farthest points in any land in the world, this is a place where huge stone faces silently watch the sea, the island of Pascalia. When the Rapa Nui people, the first inhabitants of that island, arrived here around 1200 AD, they established a completely remote civilization from the outside world. Those who made them famous worldwide are the huge stone statues that weigh up to 80 tons, but when the European sailors arrived on the island in 1722, there was only a crumbling society left behind, that magnificent civilization that built these magnificent statues. The collapse of Rapa Nui is one of the biggest issues of discussion in history. Traditional theory states that the people cut all the trees on the island to carry the giant statues, and that this situation leads to an ecological suicide. When the hunger is over, they couldn't make blood, the birds left the island and the land was eroded. When the resources were exhausted, the knowledge of the past turned into tribes who fought with each other to survive the statue rifts. However, research done in recent years tells a different story. New findings suggest that the Rapa Nui people have actually developed an agricultural system that is compatible with nature and that the population is in balance until the Europeans bring disease and slave trade to the island. No matter which theory is correct, the truth is that the mysterious writing of the island and the engineer's work that conducts thousands of years of knowledge accumulation and giant statues, Rongo Rongo, was buried in silence without being shared with the outside world due to extreme isolation of the island. Today, those giant statues continue to worship on warm shores without knowing where their creators are going. A huge civilization lived around the Mississippi River and its arms in the interior of North America between the 1800s and the 1600s. This people was not just a simple local community, but a culture that established thousands of people in the area. They were the rulers of the region with their art, trade, and construction. However, this huge structure began to collapse in a mysterious way long before the Europeans stepped on the American continent and the spread of known epidemic diseases. Between the 14th and 15th centuries, a sudden and inexplicable population decline occurred in these. The fact that the cities were turned into walls brought to mind the possibility of an internal war or an external attack, but did not come across a large-scale siege or massacre trace in archaeological excavations. People, one by one, left these developed urban centers and went to smaller, more remote villages. Developed agricultural systems were abandoned, political authorities evaporated. The reason for this sudden collapse is still a big debate among historians. Some experts argue that the decline in agricultural efficiency since the beginning of the Small Ice Age, while some argue that the overpopulation in the cities has polluted the water sources and led to chronic diseases. However, the most surprising thing is how such an organized system was solved so quickly and quietly before the theme of Europe. The Mississippi people left huge soil pyramids and complex hangars behind them, but why didn't they leave a single word that they gave up their cities? In the 1980s, the Vikings, who settled on the icy shores of Greenland in the Red Sea, stayed alive for a year. They settled in Kiana, built churches, made fur trade with Europe and struggled with animal husbandry despite the icy cold. However, at the beginning of the 15th century, this indigenous community disappeared completely without leaving any written description in a single generation. The most striking side of this disappearance is the Inuit people who live right next to them while the Vikings are disappearing. The archaeological findings show their resistance to the changing conditions of the Vikings in Jurenland. When the climate was cold and the Small Ice Age began, the seas froze and the trade routes with Europe closed. While the Inuit lived with the opportunities offered by the ice, the Vikings were trying to make Europe-style farming and feed large animals. What happened in the end is still a mystery. A mass massacre or a major epidemic did not occur in the excavations. However, DNA and isotope analyses, which have been done in recent years, show that the feeding systems of the Vikings have completely returned to sea products. This means that they either gave up at one point and tried to return to Iceland, or they were exhausted to their last breath due to hunger and isolation. A wedding record that took place in 1408 is the latest news from them. Only the remains of the Rusgar stone church remain after a 400-year civilization after that date. In 1986, a huge pit in the Sichuan state of China, which is now a coincidence, almost hit the world of archaeology. This pit lived about 3,000 years ago and belonged to the Sangsingdui culture, which no one knew about until that day. What makes this people mysterious is the enormous earphones and eye-catching bronze masks. Bronze processing technologies were so advanced that at that time bronze trees and giant statues could be cast in the size of 4 meters, which was not similar to any place in the world. However, the real strangeness was hidden in how these works were found. The city of Sangsingdui had not been destroyed by a disaster. Archaeologists realized that the people had consciously broken these enormous bronze statues and masks, burned them and buried them in a regular order in huge pits. The city was closed with a giant ritual. It is a rare event that a civilization breaks down the most valuable beings it has tried and produced for years and leaves it by burying it in the ground. It is still unknown where the people went and why they consciously killed such an advanced city. They did not leave any written records and they are not mentioned in the texts of neighboring civilizations. Although some theorists say that a great earthquake has changed the riverbed and that is why they emigrated, the religion or social motivation behind this burial ritual is still a great secret. They quietly got into the dark of history by leaving huge-eyed masks behind them. In today's Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania, the people of Tripoli, who lived between 5000 and 700 years before the nation, left a mystery much beyond the period. Before the Sumerian cities were established in Mesopotamia, the people of Tripoli were building huge settlements where 15-20,000 people lived. These cities were lined up in a circular order of thousands of houses, and were the largest human societies in the world at that time. However, the real strange thing about this culture is not in the architecture of the cities, but at the end of them. Research on Tripoli culture revealed that every 60 to 80 years a people has consciously burned his own cities. Thousands of houses are set on fire together with the things inside, and the people were building a new city that was almost the same as the old one right next to it. This cycle continued for centuries. However, around 2700 BC, they burned their last cities and did not build a new one this time. It is not known why such a people, who has such developed, self-sufficient ceramics and huge settlements, applied such a yakmarite and where they went after the last winter. Although some theories say that this is a clean or religious renovation mirror, it is not explained how so many people have dispersed so fast and without leaving a trace after the last city. There is no trace of war, no trace of rebellion, there are only remnants of a huge civilization. These communities you see will build huge statues, will draw the map of the sky, and were so powerful that they could build cities that would compete with Rome. However, power does not guarantee sustainability. Today, we are trying to recognize them only from the remains under the soil, or from the encrypted words carved into their hungry bodies. Who knows, maybe one day future generations will ask the same question for our civilization: why did they go? Which of these communities attracted the most interest of you? Let's meet in the comments. See you in the next mysterious meeting. Goodbye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, comment and like.